Welcome to the Property Buyer Podcast. Join me, Rich Harvey, multi-award winning buyer's advocate and CEO of Property Buyer, where we explore the world of real estate and help you make informed decisions about buying or investing in residential and commercial property. Our show features expert interviews, market insights, and practical tips for navigating the complex world of real estate. Whether you're a first-home buyer, a seasoned investor, or simply curious about the property market, our podcast is for you. Join us as we share our knowledge and experience and help you achieve your property goals. Hi, I'm Rich Harvey, CEO and founder of Property Buyer. Welcome to another edition of the Property Buyer Podcast, where we share the latest property market updates to help you make better property decisions. If you have a question for us, please click on the SpeakPipe tab on your screen and you can dictate the question, or alternatively, you can email us at info@propertybuyer.com.au. Today, we're going to be talking about financing, innovation, and building a property portfolio. How can you build a sizable investment portfolio over time and get your dream home on a limited budget? Getting finance approval is one of the biggest challenges facing home buyers and investors looking to secure their next property. With interest rates having returned to a more normalised level in the high 5% range, borrowers are finding it exceedingly difficult to achieve the same level of borrowing capacity that they could get 12 months ago. At the same time, the property market is now rising once again and in recovery mode, driven by a surge in migration, a serious undersupply of property, and a chronic shortage of listings. So what are some of the practical and innovative ways that you as a borrower can use smart financing strategies to secure not just one property, but buying multiple properties over the years ahead and taking advantage of a rising market? Well, today we're very fortunate to have our special guest, Theo Chambers, the CEO of Shore Financial, who'll be sharing his valuable insights and incredible financial knowledge. Welcome, Theo.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Well, look, Theo, we have a bit of a tradition on our Property Buyer podcast where we throw you a thought of the week. And this time it's from Clement Stone, W. Clement Stone, who says, "Definiteness of purpose is the starting point of all achievement." What do you take from that quote?
So I really like that quote. I think it ties quite well into something that I've always personally believed in, which is about continuity. So that purpose comment, I think a lot of people at the moment are really trying to focus on making a quick buck overnight, which 99% of the time doesn't work out because it doesn't really exist, in my opinion. There's no such thing as making a quick buck. And in a lot of these wealth creation strategies, it's about the end game, and the end game might be 10, 20 years from now, right? You have to think about the decisions you're making now and what they can equate to long term, which I think is right in line with that quote.
Yeah, brilliant. I look, absolutely. Having a purpose gives you meaning in life, and starting something is the success to achievement. I think that one, the journey of 1,000 steps starts with the first step. You've got to actually get on the property ladder. You've got to get finance approval. You've got to have a job. You've got to you can't live in the Taj Mahal property straight away, right? You've got to start small.
Well,
so
there's that other saying, all big things have small beginnings, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So talking of starting, how did you start Shore Financial, and what were your motivations for starting the business?
Well, we definitely had a small beginning. I was in lending at Commonwealth Bank for a few years. When I purchased my first property, I actually used a broker when I was working at Commonwealth Bank. So that's what made me join the broking industry. I was at McGrath's in-house finance business for a couple of years, and we were assisting real estate agents with their buyers, vendors, landlords in funding transactions or refinancing current home loans. And I realised there's a bit of a niche in the market to really support the real estate industry well. The synergy between real estate agents and mortgage brokers isn't a new concept, but I felt like no one was doing it well. Even the broking industry as a whole, I think that a lot of the big businesses 10, 20 years ago haven't really kept up with technological change, haven't really innovated like many big businesses do in different industries, right? And so we saw a bit of an opportunity and a gap in the marketplace to be that business and embrace some new age mentality to modern day business.
And how long ago did you start the business?
10 years ago
10
now.
years ago.
We had
Well done.
We had our 10-year anniversary
Congrats.
in February. Thank you.
Yeah.
10 billion in 10 years was our motto for our 10-year anniversary. It's been an amazing journey.
Great job. And what's your sort of, I guess, competitive advantage over other finance brokers? What do you do well that you think your competition doesn't do quite as well?
So back on the comment of technology, we definitely use technology a lot in the end-to-end process. I'm not scared of future technology either. A lot of people are scared that AI is going to wipe out their business. We're embracing AI, and we're looking right now at tying it into some live chat features on our website, looking at using it for content creation. But currently what we already have in place is just some real smart technology on educating consumers by a series of drip sort of marketing email systems that are specific to those individual consumers' circumstances. Even just how we collect information, how we store it, and how we go through the application process. We're just using more technology than the average operator in the industry.
Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. So tell me about your own investing journey. How did you initially get started and interested in investing in property?
Well, I wouldn't say my first investment was my best one.
Never is.
Yeah, it never is. I bought the brand new fancy looking property that was
off the plan.
No, it was a terrace,
Right.
but it was freshly renovated, and I probably paid top dollar for it at the time. Yield was low. Yield was always around 1.5–2%.
Oh, wow.
Because it was a house versus an apartment. So not the best. I've had it for close to 15 years, 14 years now. I bought it in 2009, so it's still more than doubled in growth, just about doubled, call it. But in that period of time, I don't think that's great. But yeah, basically, I wanted to get my foot in the door on the property ladder, and I went out there looking at the best way to do so, and I bought a place I could live in for now. That was probably where my judgment on the decision making was somewhat influenced, in the sense that I was trying to find something that I could live in rather than the best typical investment.
Okay. So what sort of was your motivation to get into the property market? Was you want to build a nest egg for yourself? You just want to make stacks of money? You want to retire early? What was driving that decision for you?
Yeah, a bit of all the above. Also being Greek, I grew up believing in bricks and mortar, you know.
Yeah.
That's why I probably went for land and a house over an apartment. But in the market that I bought in, being eastern suburbs, apartments in that period actually performed better.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just wanted to have something. I was paying rent prior to that. I just felt the amount I was paying in rent was not too far different in the mortgage repayments. So I may as well, pay off a mortgage. At the time, I was only 21, 22, so I could happily live with flatmates too, and they could help subsidise the cost of the mortgage. It was ambitious dreams though. I only lived in the property probably for 6 to 12 months, and then I ended up back at home with the folks and rented the property out. But then realising what it cost to own a property was somewhat motivating to have a better career as well.
Interesting you say that, sort of when you own a property. I see a lot of people that procrastinate about buying a property, but I think buying a property is a great financial discipline.
100%.
Because if you don't spend the money on your mortgage and your property, you probably spend it on depreciable items like holidays and fancy boats, which are, no problem with those things, but you've got to have extra liquidity and excess cash to buy those things, right?
You would think that you and I have spoken about this topic prior, because that is something that I go around sort of saying left, right and centre. And most recently, actually yesterday at the ARIC conference, I was talking about exactly that. I think a bit of what I call, so mortgage stress is defined as 1/3 of your income going toward mortgage repayments, the household income that is. I think that's healthy. I think 1/3 of your income should go towards your home. Because to your point, you're forcing that 1/3 of your income is going towards an appreciating asset.
That's right.
And if you don't do that, you probably end up spending more on holidays, fashion, wining and dining, so I think it's a healthy commitment.
It creates thrift, I think, when I was young, I think I spent probably 50% of my wage or more on property, because I knew that it was going to build a nest egg for my family. For me, that was my motivation. We were just having kids at the time when we started investing in property. I'd been to a lot of courses. I used to read a book a week when I was catching the train into the city for my job. I'd go to any course I could to suck up as much information. Because for me, I was an economist in my background, Theo, and I wanted to make good decisions. I was a bit of that paralysis analysis guy, where I couldn't commit to something until I knew to 3 decimal places it was going to work. But I'm so pleased I did, and bought a substantial portfolio. But so coming back to the financing angle, Theo, what strategies do you think can investors use when they're approaching the banks, if they want to maximise the value of lending, not just for one property, but to buy multiple properties? What strategies can people use?
So once you start going into the conversation of multiple properties, having the ideal debt positions and debt structure, I should say, is really crucial, and starting to think about optimizing tax deductible debt, your negative gearing benefits, and minimizing your non-deductible debt, being your owner-occupied debt. So if you've got a home and an investment property, or have a home and considering purchasing an investment property, making sure that you're not using your cash out of your offset or out of your redraw on your home, your primary residence, and putting it down toward a deposit on an investment property, for example, is a key consideration. We see countless people not structuring, their portfolio as such, and portfolio starts with one property, right?
That's right.
People think portfolio is 15, 20, 30 properties. The moment you go into the property market with one, even two properties, that's a portfolio, and these considerations need to be had. I think optimizing your tax benefits and getting your negative gearing right. You do need to probe your accountant for these conversations, because it is different for everybody's individual circumstances. The other thing is being across things like your capital gains tax exemptions or discounts, and if you're going from one property to another, making sure your exemptions on the right property, understanding things like the 6-year rule if relevant. All those things make a big difference, and then like I said, just structuring it with the bank accordingly.
I think one of the things that investors make a mistake of is they don't maximise their deductions. They don't get depreciation schedules on properties. They often forget that one. That's just a hidden cash flow that can really help them. Even for an older property, they don't realise there's still deductible items there. Even though they've changed all the laws, there's still some depreciable items there.
On that note, actually, also making sure that your accountant does the right thing in using that depreciation schedule. I had a personal experience where it was a unit off the plan, and it had a attractive depreciation schedule, being a brand new property. I got the depreciation schedule, sent it off to my accountant. A couple of years later, I realised there's no depreciation in my tax returns.
Oh no!
And they just forgot to apply it.
Whoops! There you go.
So being across your tax returns and actually understanding what means what, that's crucial too.
I think the other strategy that I think you'd always advocate is a constant review of your lending. Lending's not a set and forget thing. I think you got to be talking to your broker every 6 to 12 months minimum to go, am I getting the best rates? Do you need to pick up the phone and start negotiating with the bank? Your broker can do it for you.
Especially this day and age.
Oh, honestly, yeah, exactly.
The banks these days in this rising rate environment that we're seeing, we're seeing clients paying 1% higher in interest rates than they would with that same bank if they were a new to business customer. And sometimes it's just a phone call that we have with the bank on the client's behalf that literally reduces their rate by 1% instantly.
That's a big saving.
So being across your finances is definitely crucial.
Theo, I've got a question around technology and innovations. You mentioned that you use technology in your business, but what are some of the key technologies and innovations that you're seeing in the lending sector that are kind of exciting you? Like, are there any innovative financial products coming, any kind of innovative technology coming?
Yeah, definitely. So 12 years ago, I feel the industry was operating completely differently to how it is today. Even just all the application systems we use have a lot more sort of smarts about them. You can collect information from the client electronically, documentation securely and electronically, instead of sending manual PDFs where people have to fill in their information and then you have to manually enter it into your system. Now you can send them a client portal and that information goes straight into the system that you use when you lodge with an application with the bank. That in itself saves huge amounts of data entry. It also gives you a really good a client profile and some visibility on every client situation, even if they don't progress to an application. So you always have a nice detailed record across your whole database. And then off the back of that, every year there's more and more technology coming out with marketing automation and whatnot, which gives you the ability to uniquely target that database, right? Even borrowing sort of power assessments. There's a new program that we use now that can give you a nice detailed summary of almost 70 different banks and the various borrowing powers.
What do you say to investors that are scared of debt, right? Because a lot of people go, oh, look, I've spoken to my bank or the broker and I can borrow $1.5 million. And they go, oh, I don't really want to spend that much. I'll only spend one. And they're leaving $500,000 of borrowing capacity on the table. And if you had invested that 20 years ago, where would you be today?
Yeah.
What do you say to people that are scared of debt?
Well, this is another sort of conversation I've been having a lot with people in their superannuation, especially. I think a lot of people have no debt in their super and they keep their sort of cash in some industry super fund, earning 5 to 10% a year. But if they had some gearing in that super fund and they put that same amount of capital into let's say an 80% geared investment property, and the property was just getting 5% growth, it's 5 times, potentially 10 times more capital growth annually. Big difference, right? Same goes for your personal name. I don't think people should be scared about the debt dollar amount, right? They should just be comfortable with the servicing requirement, the monthly commitment. Yes, have a bit of a buffer in there personally. The bank does that anyway. They put a nice healthy 2.5%, 3% buffer on the rate that you're actually paying to make sure you can afford it at high rates. But even for your own sake, if the repayments are $5,000 a month, be comfortable with potentially paying 6 or 7 just in case you have some expensive months personally. And if you're comfortable with the repayments, then don't be scared of debt.
Yeah, I think I used to be scared of debt until I could see the power of leverage and realising if I'm putting 20% of cash or equity into a property, the bank's lending me the other 80, as you say, it's 5 times the leverage that you'd otherwise have. Leveraging into margin loans on the share market's a different kettle of fish because the liquidity can just, overnight you could almost lose half the value, but the property market doesn't do that.
No,
if you look historically, the property market's very, very stable and you get incredible returns. So I think your point to that safe leverage and looking at your serviceability and managing the debt, whether you've got a debt of 1 million, 5 million or 10 million or more, doesn't matter. It's how you can service that debt.
Spot on. And you look at to your point on volatility, you look at what happened in the GFC. That was one of the biggest financial crises of all time. And the Sydney property market only went backwards 7%. It wasn't even much of a correction at all. And yeah, to your point about making money off the bank's money, that's something that many investors have been doing confidently for a long time.
So if you want to get addicted to something, I always say get addicted to OPM, other people's money, the bank's money particularly, because that's a really healthy way to grow your portfolio. And but do it safely and do it with advice as always. And as you say, Theo, have a buffer. I've always had a buffer, had an offset account, and my wife and I always make sure we've got enough for at least 3 to 6 months. If everything went pear-shaped, then we can actually know we can live comfortably, pay off whatever debt we need to service debt, and then reevaluate where we are from there. And to that other point, life insurance, I haven't got this, we're not going to sort of promote every other product out there, but I think a lot of people should be seriously thinking about income protection and life insurances because, you can, let's say you build up a great portfolio and then you leave it to your partner and they can't handle the debt and suddenly they've got to sell in a down market. So there's all sorts of advice and other advisors you need to get around you to build these portfolios, eh?
I think a lot of people have that consideration only once they get to 50, 60 years old and they think it's relevant, but at that point it can sometimes be too late. If you get life insurance and income protection, in your 30s and 40s when you've got a nice, clean bill of health, you can maintain those policies into your 50s and 60s. So, yeah, 100%. And I've seen those policies save lives, save families. I think the moment you have children and loved ones that you want to care about and make sure that they're going to be supported if something happens to the main income of the household, then you need to look at those protection plans.
Yeah, well, just to your point, I've done exactly that. We got significant life insurance. So if I die tomorrow, my wife gets $4 million. So
She might end up killing you.
I know, look out, right? But no, we exactly put that in place. I had to go. Get on this treadmill for 15 minutes and do the stress test. They took some blood out of my arm and did all these great tests. And they looked at me and said, "Rich, you fit or something?" And blood pressure was really good. I said, "Yeah, well, I go to the gym 3 or 4 times a week and I eat healthy." Oh, okay. So I'm a good low risk for the health insurers. But at the same time, I'm always going to have that in place, And as you get older, as you're saying, into your 50s and 60s, it is much harder. The policy I've got now, I couldn't get that policy at my age. I couldn't get it. So I'm very pleased I've got that policy in place. So it's good protection. So what else is technology going to change in the finance industry? Do you think AI will have an impact on the finance industry?
So this is a topic that's getting a lot of sort of noise in the media at the moment, or in the industry, just internally amongst mortgage brokers. I think people need to realise that there has already been a lot of very algorithmic-based sort of credit assessment technology around for a while now. You look at UBank and some of the huge operators, UBank being NAB's subsidiary, they've been doing it for 10 years, right? It's not something that's just come around once Elon Musk and all these fancy tech guys start spending money on AI. Our major banks, who are billion-dollar businesses, some of the biggest banks in the world, they've been spending millions of dollars on this type of technology for a very long time. So it does work. Like these algorithmic-based credit assessment programs or software, I should say, where it will approve home loans based on data. It does work. It will have a place in the market, but at the end of the day, humans are going to want humans to hold their hand through the biggest transactions they make in their lifetime, even if they've made those transactions before. You only make a handful of these property transactions in your lifetime, and even if you've done it once, twice, 3 times, you still just want to speak to an individual.
Well, I think I was watching something on Netflix the other day. It was called Coded, and it was just talking about AI in the finance industry and how certain credit card applications are biased against women compared to men, and how they were getting a lower credit limit compared to the men that were applying. And it was just the AI algorithm wasn't right. And so I think it's really important, this point about having a broker look at your finances independently, because they can make representations to the bank on your behalf over and above whatever the technology is there, right?
Yeah, it's amazing how there's still that sort of commercial discretionary type approach with lending, where it's up to one individual to speak, let's call it your broker, to speak to an individual internally at the bank to sort of talk through the ins and outs of a client situation to get the application over the line. There needs to be some human consideration involved.
Yeah, sure. And are there any particular innovative ways that the lending industry or any particular finance products that are out there that can help the average Australian achieve their dream of home ownership at a faster rate than what they're thinking they can get there?
Well, we have something that we're pretty proud of. I like to say it's our own, but it is some fancy tech guys that we use that have built it for us. It's a State of Sydney report which uses a whole lot of data and marketplaces to sort of forecast, top picks. It got so much attention recently that it actually led to us going on 9 News and sharing it with Mark. What's his name?
Mark Burris? Who?
No,
on Channel 9.
The reporter from Channel 9.
Yeah.
Mark Burrows.
Oh, Mark Burrows, yeah.
And and then also on 2GB with Ben Fordham. But that report is based on analysing data in every marketplace, days on market, supply levels, sold price versus listing price, the disparity between the two. And with that, we can sort of identify hot markets where we think buyers should be looking. And in the last 12 months, there were many markets that still had double-digit growth, even in a downturn market.
Exactly. Well, that comes to a point about asset selection and property selection, which is exactly what my business is all about, is helping clients make much better property decisions. Because whether you're buying a home or investment, even for your home, it's an investment decision, right? It's going to be generally the biggest purchase you're going to make. And the leverage you can get from buying a home and then using that equity to then fund your investments, that's what I did, and it's really going to set you up. If you go and buy a property in a pretty average area that has slow or sluggish growth, it's going to take you longer to get more properties into your portfolio compared to if you buy properties that got the right growth and fundamentals behind them.
Well, there's a bit of a blend there, right? You have to, I feel sometimes if you're going for a house and aiming for more capital growth, there can be a sacrifice on yield. So if you are looking at having a diversified portfolio, you probably need a combination of the two, right? Some yielding assets and some capital growing assets.
That's right, absolutely. Well, that's how I always advise my clients. I'm more talking just about buying the first home to actually get into the market.
Sure, sorry.
But I think down the track, Absolutely, 100%. I agree. You've got to have a blend of growth properties and high cash flow properties, because the high cash flow properties are going to enable you to hold your existing portfolio and satisfy the bank's requirement for extra serviceability to buy more. Because otherwise you just run out of capacity. You hit a brick wall and the banks say, hey, no more.
I think that yield consideration is huge, because it can really then sort of help drive some momentum in your portfolio by getting the second or third investment property.
So one of the strategies we've been doing, Theo, is we use a number of ways to create positive cash flow for our clients. We do renovation strategies, we do adding bedrooms, we do granny flats, we do now rooming houses, and all of these strategies, even not a big fan of holiday lets, but some of our clients have bought holiday lets. We got a 10% yield on a holiday let, net 10% yield on the Gold Coast recently, which is incredible. So there's a number of different strategies that people can use, and you don't need to spend $3 million to get these like you do in commercial. So some of the resi stuff we're doing is getting higher yields than you would get in traditional commercial.
Well, going back to my personal experience, like I said, my first purchase wasn't probably the wisest, and it was because I bought that brand new sort of polished product. The best experiences I've had is exactly that. Adding some sort of improvements to the property, adding some value by some small capital improvements.
Absolutely. I think because what you did, you basically bought a retail property. And then
exactly.
you're better off to buy a wholesale property, add value, and then down the track you sell it as a retail property, right?
But you've got to be quite confident about that, right? I think a lot of people are a little bit nervous, especially right now with the noise on renovations and the rising building costs. A lot of people don't have that confidence.
Correct, yeah. You've got to get the right support crew around you if you're going to go down that route. So here's a good question for you. If you had $1 million in equity today, up your sleeve, what would you do with it in today's market?
So I'm still big on the Sydney market. I'm maybe biased a little bit being in the market, but I just think Sydney as a whole has a fundamental supply and demand issue. Other markets have high levels of supply. There's two great growth corridors in my opinion, well, in many people's opinions. The Northwest Growth Corridor, that's benefiting off that new rail system, and that Southwest Growth Corridor out to sort of Gregory Hills, Camden, around there. Anything along those train lines, I think, if you're talking $1 million equity, you could buy substantial properties in those marketplaces if you put some gearing in there as well, especially in that Northwest Corridor. You have to realise that areas like the ponds and whatnot, it's still only 15, 20 minutes from the city if you hop on the train, and you can get a proper size house, or call it $1.5 million, So yeah, I'd look at those marketplaces. Once again, they're the ones actually that were in our State of Sydney report, and they're still, I think, forecasted to keep going. It's the infrastructure in those marketplaces that really adds value and brings more people to those areas.
Excellent, yeah. I mean, for me, if I had $1 million in equity, I wouldn't just look at Sydney. I think for every client too, it's different, right, Theo? Because everyone's got a different position. Some people might have 3 properties in Sydney and none in Melbourne, Brisbane, or other states. So I think for us, we also help our clients look at a bigger picture of diversification and strategies. But definitely, look, in Sydney, I definitely think sort of that area around Penrith, around St Mary's, for example, you talk about the train line, all of those areas are being gentrified and changing. And definitely buying a house where you add an extra dwelling or a granny flat or bigger rooms is definitely a good strategy. Another pocket that's sort of forgotten is the Shire. Obviously, you need a little bit more than $1 million to get in there, but that's kind of, they call it God's country down there, It's a bit like the Northern Beaches was 40 years ago. Beautiful area, but we're getting a lot of our clients buying in there at quite what we call affordable levels. But definitely I'd also be, for $1 million, we're buying some great investment properties in Melbourne, particularly Bayside. We can buy properties around that sort of 800 to 900, getting $700 a week in rent. So it's pretty decent yields.
Is that a unit?
No, that's a house.
That's a house?
That's a freestanding house, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, probably 800 to 900. So you'd head towards sort of Frankston South, that sort of area.
Which is like near the Mornington Peninsula?
Correct, on the way down. Yeah, about 45 minutes from the city. Yeah, and the other pocket we certainly love at the moment is Brisbane, where we're getting a great combination of growth and yields. we're typically finding houses anywhere from 600 to a million quite easily and getting 5 to 5.5% gross yields.
So Brisbane's a big area and it's getting a lot of airtime. Where are you focusing on Brisbane? Because I feel like there's a lot of people going down towards that Ipswich.
It just depends. Yeah, Ipswich is more sort of a lower demographic. We like the areas, we like the northern pockets, like around Mango Hill, North Lakes, that kind of area, up toward the Redcliffe Peninsula. We also really like Springfield. Master plan community, very tightly held, very, very strong, tight rental market in there as well. And again, also that area in Cleveland, Redland Bay, it's a bit of an undiscovered pocket. Again, getting harder to get in there for under a mil for those sort of blocks. But yeah, our experts, they hand pick certain pockets there and know the areas to avoid and the areas to buy in.
And correct me if I'm wrong, is that north end, that's where there's some major sort of infrastructural improvements, like the new stadium, I believe.
That's at Wollongabba. That's about 6 k's from the city. Yeah, the Gabba is Wollongabba, and that's sort of much closer to the CBD. But Cleveland Bay is further toward the east, just Manly Wynnum, sort of right on the coast, just down from Bribie Island. So I've got another question about interest rates for you, Theo. We've had 11 interest rate rises. Where do you think interest rates are going to end up? Do you think the RBA's gone too far?
Hot topic at the moment. I think everybody's probably sick of hearing about interest rates on the news. But yeah, look, I think that last interest rate rise this month shocked everybody, but it didn't shock us. The economists were forecasting at least another 1 or 2 rate rises. Inflation is still high, right? It is needed. But the inflation's high because the economy is thriving, right? Where unemployment hasn't started to rise aggressively. Property prices have now been rising for 3-4 months. The economy is still running well. Whilst economic growth is slowing, we're still humming, you could say, as an economy, better than some of our sort of other developed countries around the world. I think we've definitely got one more rate rise to come. Personally, I think the sooner the better, because I think we should get them out of the way and done with, and then start looking at easing to re-stimulate, right? CBA chief economist is forecasting that rates will be down by 1% by May next year, within 12 months. So I'd rather go up quick and down quick, in my opinion. The key factor to consider with where rates are going and how long they'll be elevated for, you should say, is inflation and whether it stays around sort of 4 or 5%. There is a risk that inflation might be a little bit stubborn and the economy goes into this stagflation state where economic growth does ease, unemployment does increase, purely because of the lag also on businesses having to rise prices because of inflation. So there might be some more inflation to come, just like even energy prices, right? I think last week they're talking about another 30% increase in power across the country.
Yeah, it hurts. Everything hurts. Cost of living, I'll tell you, it's all hurting. But I reckon I'm on point with you. I agree. I think we've got one more interest rate rise. I just did the Finder survey yesterday, and one of the 40 economists that does that survey, and I said I think the terminal rate will be 4.1%. I'm saying they're going to have a hold in next month, in June, and then a rise in July, and that'll be it. I reckon the rates will be down 1%, not by mid next year, but probably by September to December next year.
Yeah,
I don't think they'll come off as high, because the reason being is that rents are so high, and that makes up a very big percentage of CPI. And because rents are high and going to continue to be high because of lack of supply in the market, it's all perpetuating. And because there's a big push to increase wages through the Fair Work, depending on how that decision gets handed down, whether it's 5% or 7%, heaven forbid it's 7%, because that'll just fuel inflation even more. All of these factors are leading to inflation being persistently high. I also think the Reserve Bank needs to perhaps readdress its target. I think it's probably going to end up not getting it below 3%. I think 2% is really a bit of a fanciful myth that they'll get it down that high.
Well, that's what Andrew was saying in that last seminar we did together, that we've been for a decade trying to kick inflation off that 1.5% level it's been at, and now that we've finally got inflation, up a much higher level, maybe we need to adjust our target. It can't be a 2-3% target on an ongoing basis.
Exactly. So I want to get back to this topic of building a portfolio with you. Love your advice for our listeners here about how a lot of investors, they get stuck on just buying one investment property. I think it's the figure is like about 80% of investors have one investment property and 20% have a larger number, and about 1% have 6 or more. How do you get to be the top 1%? How do you buy multiple properties over time?
So definitely having a bit of a strategy, speaking to the experts. Advice is key, I think, and there's many experts to speak to, not just property consultants, but accountants and whatnot, to understand what the net effect of some of these decisions will lead to. You've got to be proactive in those conversations, because I find accountants in particular, they're reactive, not proactive. They're not going to plant these seeds for you. You've got to go to them with the questions, and they'll just come back to you with the answers, really. But I think you mentioned a valid point before about yielding assets. That's something that I didn't do myself, and I wish in my sort of early transactions I had better yielding assets, because like I sort of already touched on, the momentum for improving your serviceability to buy future investment properties is so beneficial. If you can find good yielding assets, and these days I think a good yielding asset is 3.5–4%. You can get much better. I know, that 10% play is amazing. That's with some capital improvements. But I would have been grateful historically if I just had 4%.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I've bought some properties over time, Theo, that I thought were good, which turned out to be a bit average. And you've got to be patient as an investor. The way I'd answer that question too, for me, is you've got to be patient. That sometimes you buy a property and it's a bit like a baby. You've got to feed it, you've got to nurture it, you've got to cuddle it, you've got to tuck it into bed every night, right? And over time, it learns to walk and talk and feed itself, right? So you hold a property portfolio long enough and it returns massive dividends. Like, you look at the capital growth projections at 7% on a graph, and it really takes off after 15 years.
Yeah, 100%.
I'll give you an example. I bought a property up at Airlie Beach many, many years ago. I bought a block of land and built on it, and it cost me $375K to build the house and $150 for the land. Owes me about roughly $500. And I was getting like $450 at the time rent, which is, not bad, right? It wasn't
5%,
bad.
yeah.
Almost 5 at the time. Anyway, it just did nothing for about 6 years. And it was like, do I sell this property? Do I hold it? It was giving us some depreciation and tax benefits. Anyway, obviously the last 5 years it's been fantastic, So I'm getting $850 a week in rent now, It's rents its head off and never vacant, So sometimes just holding a property. But there are other times where I've had many clients that have bought, for example, 1 or 2 bedroom units in Brisbane, in areas that were completely oversupplied, and they went nowhere for 10 years, Or I remember 1 or 2 bedroom units in Parramatta. So many people I knew, not our clients, but people bought them and they just stagnated. They're the kind of properties that hold you back from building a portfolio. So it's really important that people get advice on the kind of asset and the yield, as you say, that will generate future growth over time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think patience is a virtue sometimes. It's people trying to make a quick buck in property transactions in a year or two. You need to think long term, and that's when you can sort of tap into the equity and have the yield that's paid down debt. That's when it starts to pay off.
So for those that are kind of gung-ho, that want to make money fast, are there any strategies? What's the fastest way you've seen people make money in property yourself?
Well, you're right. It probably goes back to some capital improvements, right? So you need to do your due diligence and make sure you've got the right people around you, a builder you can trust, some people that've been through the process personally that you can relate to, and finding an asset that's that wholesale asset like you referred to, where you can instantly add some value, take a higher yield and some capital growth recognition off the table, purely from sometimes just a cosmetic renovation. I think structural, when you add bedrooms, is also a no-brainer, but in many marketplaces it's hard to find that, because so many people have sort of fully sort of capitalised the property already, and so sometimes just walking into some of these assets that were renovated 10, 15 years ago and giving them a bit of a cosmetic facelift is just as rewarding. But yeah, I think that's, if you want to talk about the quickest solution to some capital uplift, definitely renovating, in my opinion.
And on the flip side, what do you think are the biggest risks that investors need to be aware of when they're going down this track of buying multiple properties and investing?
Well, despite what I just said, renovating can be the biggest risk, right? If you get it wrong, if you have a builder that's bitten off more than they can chew, and and your 6-month build ends up being 12 to 18, or if you've got a building contract that's variable, not fixed, and your 300 grand build turns into 600,000, All these variables can really drive someone almost broke, right? Also, just not being too bullish and aggressive in decision making. I feel people, the people that I've seen personally or witness get into the most sort of uncomfortable situations haven't listened to the experts around them. So one cliche situation would have been buying and selling in the same marketplace. Some people have been confident enough to go purchase a property with a long settlement with the intentions of selling their property in the settlement period, and they weren't listening to what people told them that their property was probably worth. They went for it anyway, and it hasn't worked out for them. So really listening to the advisors around you.
Yeah, great. Really good points. Got two more questions for you. Tell me an interesting story that either maybe it's a personal story you've had about buying a property or for yourself, that something that's really unique and interesting you could share with our listeners.
So I think commercial properties are some of the most interesting stories, because what's so unique and amazing about commercial properties is that you can convince your tenant to do the renovation for you pretty much. And most interesting story I ever had, this one wasn't an at arm's length transaction in the sense that the tenant was the client himself, where he bought a somewhat dilapidated commercial premises, and he put his business into this property. So he bought the property in his super fund, and the super fund leased the transaction, or leased the property, to his business. And as part of the lease and the terms, some significant capital improvements was needed, and the client spent well over $1 million on pretty much, I'd almost say, a new building. It was a big job, which led to the property actually having multiple tenancies, and the super fund picks that up basically tax free, and the business gets an expense for that capital works, really. So that was the most unique, amazing situation I've ever seen. I learned a lot from that client.
Brilliant. Yeah, well, it's great. I mean, you're on the receiving end of all of the numbers there, so that's fantastic. Yeah, brilliant. And lastly, can you just share perhaps with our listeners the best piece of investment advice you've ever received?
Well, it goes back to that comment about continuity. I don't feel like, apart from those potential conversations we just had about certain renovating scenarios, I think there is no get-rich-quick scheme. I think you've got to be in it for the long game. Slow and steady wins the race. Bit by bit, you build that sort of dream home almost brick by brick. So continuity is key. Just stick to a long-term strategy. Don't deviate and try and be too much of a risk taker. If the numbers stack up, if things look like long-term you can't go wrong, stick to the plan and follow that pathway.
Fantastic. Great advice there, Theo. And if people want to get in touch with you, how can they find you?
Hop on our website, shorefinancial.com.au, or you can give us a call, 1300 416 700. Our brokers are the leading expert lenders of the industry, #1 independent, so you can get expert advice with any one of our team.
Wonderful. Look, Theo Chambers, thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful. And for all of you listeners out there, if you do have any questions for us, as I said, you can click on the SpeakPipe tab there on your screen, or send us an email, info@propertybuyer.com.au, or you can go straight to our website. Thank you so much again for listening, and we look forward to bringing you another exciting episode real soon. Thanks again. Well, thanks for being with us on the Property Buyer podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you have any questions or would like further information about buying a property, please visit propertybuyer.com.au, and we'd be delighted to help. We have loads of free resources and market updates and recent articles for you to explore. We look forward to joining you on another episode very soon. I'm Rich Harvey. Thanks for listening.